What did it mean to be clean 2,000 years ago? For centuries, we have imagined hygiene in the time of Jesus as either non-existent or simply primitive, a world of unwashed bodies and filthy conditions. But what if that image misses something crucial? What if the people of first-century Judea were fighting a sophisticated battle for cleanliness, armed with engineering knowledge and chemical expertise, yet losing to an enemy they could not see? How did families decide each morning which precious drops of water would go to ritual washing and which to survival? And why did people who followed meticulous purity laws still suffer from diseases that those very laws were meant to prevent? Stay until the end, because what you will learn reveals a world far more complex and desperate than we typically imagine. The day began with a decision that never became easier. A family woke in their limestone house as the first gray light touched the doorway. The air was dense with the smell of sleeping animals and the residue of last night's fire. Before anyone could eat, there was the question of water. The cistern in the courtyard held what remained from the winter rains, perhaps enough for several months if used carefully, perhaps not. Every member of the family knew how much was left, because everyone had helped carry it, bucket by bucket. Water was never something that simply appeared. It was the result of last year's labor and this year's anxiety. Religious law required hand-washing before meals. Not a quick rinse, but a deliberate ritual. Water poured over each hand from a vessel in a specific manner. This was not optional. But the same water was needed for cooking the morning bread, for the lentil stew that would sustain the family. And everyone would need to drink. The mother made the calculation silently. Enough for the ritual washing, but it meant the afternoon washing of feet would have to wait. There was no correct answer, only compromises that accumulated over days and weeks. In a land where rain fell only during the winter months, every drop used for cleanliness was a drop unavailable for something else. Hygiene was never automatic. It was always chosen, always weighed against other necessities. The hands were washed, the prayer was said. But as soon as anyone stepped outside, dust from the packed earth streets settled back onto the skin. The ritual had been completed, yet within moments the visible result had vanished. The cistern was the thin line between a manageable life and a desperate one. Every house in the hill country had at least one, carved directly into the limestone bedrock. The shape was deliberate, wide at the bottom, narrowing toward the top. This design minimized water surface area, reducing evaporation during the long months when no rain would fall. But the rock itself was porous. Without treatment, water seeped through the stone and disappeared. The solution required both chemistry and precision. Hydraulic lime plaster was the key, a special mixture that hardened underwater, creating a waterproof seal that could withstand the pressure of thousands of liters. The application of this plaster was a family's annual gamble. First, a thick base coat filling every crack, then a smoother finishing layer to resist leaking and algae growth. The quality of this work determined everything. A skilled application meant water that stayed clean for months. A rushed job meant slow seepage and the gradual realization that the reserve was vanishing. In regions like Qumran, near the Dead Sea, communities developed flash flood harvesting systems. When rare desert storms came, water rushed down the dry wadis with tremendous force, carrying rocks and debris. Engineers built dams and channels to capture this surge, directing it first into settling basins. The settling basins were crucial. Water entered thick with suspended sediment. But as it rested, gravity did its work. The heavy particles dropped. The water cleared. Only then was it channeled into the main storage cisterns. All of this engineering, all of this labor, was done for a resource that would be used for just one season, because next year the entire process would begin again. In the absence of soap, the body could not be washed in the modern sense. Dirt could not be dissolved. It had to be physically removed with oil and bronze. The process began by spreading olive oil across the skin. The oil loosened the accumulated grime, the dried sweat, the dust that clung to every pore. Then came the strigil, a curved bronze blade. It was dragged across the skin in long strokes, scraping away the oil along with everything it had collected. What came off was a dark, viscous residue, the physical evidence of a day's labor. This was not gentle. It required pressure. The goal was not comfort. The goal was removal. For those who could not afford bronze tools, abrasive sand or rough cloth sufficed. The principle was always the same. Dirt must be mechanically extracted because water alone would not take it. Clothing presented a different challenge. Wool and linen absorbed sweat and oils. Simple washing in water was insufficient. The fibers needed chemical treatment. This was the work of the fuller. On street corners throughout towns, large ceramic jars stood open to the public. These jars collected urine, not as squalor, but as industrial resource. Stale urine became rich in ammonia, a powerful base capable of breaking down fatty acids, and lanolin. The fuller's workshop was built around large vats. Clothes were submerged in the urine solution. Then workers climbed into the vats and performed the fuller's jump, a rhythmic treading that forced the liquid through the fabric while ammonia did its chemical work. The smell was overwhelming. The process took hours, but the result was fabric genuinely clean. There was also proto-soap. Wood ash, boiled and evaporated, left behind potassium carbonate. Mixed with animal fat and heated, a chemical reaction occurred. The result was a crude surfactant that could help break down grease. But all of this required resources: oil, bronze, access to a fuller. For the poor, cleanliness was often reduced to water alone, used sparingly, cleaning only what was visible. The mikvah was the physical center of purity law, a stepped pool carefully constructed to hold a specific volume. The water had to be living water, rainwater or spring water that had not been carried by human hands in a vessel. Men immersed after certain types of ritual impurity. Women immersed at specific times. Before major festivals, entire communities would use the mikvah. The act of immersion was total. Every part of the body submerged. Emerging from the water meant emerging into ritual purity. This was the theory. The practice was more complicated. Many mikvaot, especially in smaller towns, were filled during the rainy season and then used for months without significant refreshing. The water became stagnant, warm, perfect for microorganisms. Each person who entered brought with them skin cells, oils, bacteria. Each person who exited took water still clinging to their skin and hair. If towels or robes were shared, or if the same mikvah was used by dozens without the water being changed, the pool became a vector for transmission. Archaeological evidence confirms this. Even in elite households, families with private facilities and better water, Intestinal parasites were endemic. 4 distinct types have been identified from Jerusalem's upper city cesspits: roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm, pinworm. These were the diseases of a population sharing water and unable to break the cycle of reinfection. Some communities developed workarounds. Wealthier mikvaot included an adjacent tank called an otsar that held pure rainwater connected by a channel. The pure water would touch the used water, purifying it according to religious law while allowing some circulation. But even this was imperfect. Without modern filtration, biological contamination remained. The paradox was inescapable. The ritual bath was meant to make the body pure, but the very act of immersion in shared, stagnant water could spread disease. Spiritual purity and biological health were not the same thing. The ritual was performed correctly. Hands were washed before every meal according to precise requirements. Water poured from a vessel, both hands covered. The blessing recited. Everything done exactly as tradition demanded. And yet the parasites thrived. The missing link was not in the washing. It was in what came after. The food itself carried the contamination. Vegetables pulled from the ground, fruits that grew close to the soil, grain threshed on floors where animals had walked, all potentially harboring microscopic parasite eggs. The cycle began underground. In a rocky landscape where natural fertilizer was scarce, human waste became the most available source of nutrients for crops. Night soil was spread on fields. This was not carelessness. It was agricultural necessity. Without it, yields would drop and hunger would follow. But the parasite eggs survived. They remained viable in the soil, on vegetables, on everything that grew. Washing the produce helped, but without modern understanding of microbiology, it was impossible to know when something was truly clean. Cooking killed many parasites, but not all food was cooked. Fresh vegetables, fruits eaten raw. Each was a potential entry point. Once inside a human host, the parasites reproduced. Their eggs passed out through human waste, and the cycle began again. This explains why even elite families still suffered. Their toilets were private, carved stone. They had access to fullers, to soap-like substances, to better maintained ritual baths. And still, the archaeological record shows they were infected. The soil was the reservoir. As long as night soil was used on crops, as long as food was grown in that soil and eaten, the cycle could not be broken. All the ritual purity in the world could not overcome the biological reality that the food supply itself was contaminated. Infant mortality was devastating. 3 or 4 out of every 10 children did not survive to adulthood. Adults who survived childhood often died by their late 30s. The skeletal remains tell the story that texts do not. A population under constant biological assault. The people of 1st century Judea were not ignorant of cleanliness. They were trapped by an invisible enemy operating below the threshold of their understanding. Perfect cleanliness was impossible inside the typical house. The space itself resisted it. The ground floor was shared with animals during colder months. A goat, perhaps a few sheep. They were kept in the lower section where the floor descended slightly. This arrangement provided warmth. The metabolic heat from animals rose and warmed the family sleeping above. In a climate where nights could be cold enough to kill, this warmth was survival. But it came with consequences. The smell of manure was constant, Animal hair drifted through the air. Fleas were unavoidable. The waste was regularly cleared, but the odor never fully left. The floor itself was packed earth mixed with lime and ash, practical and durable, but it generated fine dust. Every footstep released particles. In the dry season, this dust was everywhere, on skin, in hair, on food. Cooking added another layer. The Taban oven was fueled by wood when available, but often by dried brush or animal dung. Dung was the most common fuel because wood was scarce. As it burned, it produced thick, acrid smoke. Without chimneys, the smoke filled the room before seeping out through the doorway. Eyes stung. Throats grew raw, but the bread had to be baked. The limestone walls, so effective at regulating temperature, also held moisture. During humid periods, the stones absorbed water from the air. This created ideal conditions for mold. The smell of dampness mixed with other odors, fermented foods, fish sauce, wine, the sweat of bodies in close quarters. There were no windows. Ventilation came only from the doorway and roof access. At night, the door was closed for security, and the air inside became dense and still. Fine-toothed combs made of bone have been found in excavations. These were tools against lice, which were endemic. The combs were drawn through hair repeatedly, catching insects and eggs. It was a daily task, never fully successful. The sensory environment was one of density, dense smells, dense air, dense proximity. Cleanliness was managed, not achieved. The goal was not to eliminate odor or dirt, but to keep them tolerable. Elite homes in Jerusalem's upper city had features that ordinary families could not imagine. Private toilets consisting of carved stone seats over deep cesspits, courtyards with multiple cisterns, flagstone or mosaic floors instead of packed earth. These families could send clothes to professional fullers regularly. They could use bronze strigils and imported oils. Their children were more likely to survive infancy, not because they were stronger, but because the household had resources to cushion against disease. But even these advantages had limits. The cesspits beneath elite toilets have been excavated and analyzed. The findings are striking. The same 4 types of intestinal parasites found in poor communities were also present here. Roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm, pinworm. None discriminated based on status. The reason is simple. The contamination was systemic. It was in the soil. It was in the food supply. It was in shared water sources and communal spaces where classes mixed. A wealthy family might eat better food, but if that food was grown using night soil from the same contaminated environment, the parasites still found their way in. For the poor, hygiene was reduced to essentials. Water was drawn from communal wells at a distance, requiring significant labor. Clothes were washed infrequently by hand in cold water. Families shared sleeping space with animals, not by choice, but by necessity. Status bought comfort. It bought privacy. It bought better access to tools that made cleanliness easier to maintain. But it did not buy immunity. The invisible enemy beneath the soil did not respect class boundaries. The people of first-century Judea were not primitive. They were sophisticated engineers who understood principles that many civilizations took centuries to develop. They knew that limestone absorbed heat during the day and released it at night. They calculated the precise gradient needed for aqueducts to flow without stagnation. They understood that hydraulic lime could harden underwater, creating cisterns that held water under pressure. They knew chemistry. They understood that wood ash mixed with fat created a substance that could clean in ways water could not. They knew that aged urine produced ammonia that broke down grease. They followed meticulous laws regarding cleanliness. Hands washed before meals, bodies immersed in mikvahot according to precise rituals. Utensils cleaned, clothes laundered, everything done according to tradition. And yet they died young. They suffered chronic infections. Their children were carried away by diseases that started in the gut. Their brilliance, their discipline, none of it was enough. The problem was not that they did things wrong. The problem was that they were fighting a battle they could not see. They could see dirt, so they removed it mechanically. They could see contamination in water, so they built settling basins. They developed laws that made sense given what was visible to them. But they could not see microbes. They could not see parasite eggs in the soil. They could not see bacteria multiplying in stagnant water. They could not see the invisible chain that connected night soil to crops, to food, to human gut, to cesspit, to soil again. Without that knowledge, all their engineering addressed the wrong threats. They built systems to manage water scarcity, and those systems worked. They developed chemical processes to clean fabric and skin, and those processes worked. But the real enemy was biological, microscopic, and completely outside their conceptual framework. This is the most profound tension in ancient hygiene. It was not a failure of intelligence or effort. It was a limitation of perception. They did everything that could be done with the knowledge they had. They created impressive solutions to the problems they could identify. But the problems that killed them were invisible. The ritual purity they achieved was real according to their religious system. But biological purity remained out of reach. The cleanliness they saw coexisted with contamination they could not detect. And so the cycle continued, generation after generation, until the scientific revolution revealed what had always been there, an entire world of microscopic life, indifferent to ritual, thriving in the gap between what people could see and what was actually true. To understand hygiene in the time of Jesus is to understand the limits of engineering without biology. It is to see a population that mastered the physics of stone and the chemistry of ash, yet remained helpless before an invisible world they could not name. They washed their hands according to ancient law. They immersed in ritual baths. They scraped their skin with bronze and treated their clothes with ammonia. They did everything their knowledge permitted, and it was both impressive and insufficient. The real lesson is not that they were primitive, but that they were trapped, brilliant enough to build sophisticated systems, disciplined enough to follow them religiously, yet blind to the microscopic enemy that those systems could not touch. And if this investigation expanded your understanding of how fragile daily survival was in the ancient world, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Until the next video.